Welcome everyone to Inclusion 101. In this series, we'll be talking about parental and family rights under IDEA. I'm Carrie Cormier,
And Jahari Sykes-Ratliff.
and we are advisory committee members of the LRC-South, a division of educational services in the New Jersey Department of Education. So this video is brought to you by the Learning Resource Center Network. It is a project under the Office of Special Education. We aim to foster the achievement of all students with disabilities, their families, and educational professionals who work with them as they pursue the goal of increasing opportunities and improving educational outcomes in special education. So through the Learning Resource Center network, educators, leaders, and families have access to support, services, and professional development through each of the centers in the network. So the LRC locations and contact info is listed on the slide here. We have locations, the LRC North and LRC North Satellite, LRC Central, and the LRC South. So as we mentioned, Jahari and I are members of the LRC South, and so we are bringing you this professional development series through Rowan University's College of Education. We invite you to attend and visit us in our production center in James Hall. We have a resource library, and we offer many different professional development and family resource series. As you can see here, some of the work that we do. And we also invite you to check out our website at gorowan.edu/LRC South. So our agenda for today's video is we will discuss the laws governing special education services. We will review the 6 principles of the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and we will talk about parental rights under IDEA. Some of our norms at the LRC South and throughout the network is we encourage the use of strengths-based language and demonstrating a growth mindset. We engage in solution-oriented discussions with open minds. We encourage reflection on what is shared and seeking clarification or support when needed. And we also want to stay focused on the topic, actively listen to one another, and ensure all voices are heard. Our goals and objectives for today. As a result of this video, families, caregivers, and educators will be able to identify their rights as established by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So diving in, some of the laws governing special education. First up, we have an educational law. As we've mentioned, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, or IDEA. This law was originally passed as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975. We have since updated the name. And this law outlines special education services. It is what developed special education as we know it. So many of you may be familiar with the concept of IEPs, or individual education programs. These are guaranteed under the IDEA. So again, these are legal documents that provide modifications and accommodations so that all children have access to public education in public schools. We also have 2 civil rights laws that influence special education. The first is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Again, this is another law that was passed in the 70s, 1973. And so under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, that is where we get 504 plans. So if your child or student does not have an IEP, there's a chance that they may have a 504. And so 504 plans are guaranteed under this law, which provides accommodations to individuals. There is also the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990. And this act addresses access and accommodations in public spaces. So ensuring that all Americans, all individuals have access to public buildings and public places.
So there are 6 procedural safeguards of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. The first one is free and appropriate public education. And so this ensures that every eligible child with a disability has the right to a free, appropriate public education. And so this is provided at no cost to the parents other than ordinary costs that may be charged to all students. And it meets the standards established by the State Department of Education, as well as being designed to meet the unique need of your child.
So when thinking about free, appropriate public education, we just want to be mindful of appropriate is a very broad term. And so there have been several court cases attempting to set parameters to what is considered appropriate. Most recently in 2017, the Supreme Court ruled in the case of Andrew F. versus the Douglas County Schools um, that an appropriate education, a FAPE, requires students to do more than just de minimis was the term that they used. So doing more than just the basic minimum that students should be provided, a good education. And so really thinking about having access to the general education curriculum with the appropriate modifications and accommodations. And so FAPE, is one of those terms that it is very broad and open to interpretation.
Mhm. The next procedural safeguard is least restrictive environment. And so IDEA requires that to the maximum amount appropriate, children with disabilities in public or private schools or care facilities are to be educated with children that are not disabled or neurotypical children. So any placement outside the general education classroom has to be justified by the child's individual um, education plan, which we'll talk about in a minute. And students must have meaningful access to the same age peers without disabilities when appropriate.
And so again, really thinking back to another video in this series where we talk about understanding inclusion, a lot of scholars and a lot of researchers will take the least restrictive environment, the LRE, to be the place in the law that defines what inclusion is. And so really thinking about in that video in the series, we talked about some of the tenets of inclusive education. And so a key tenet is to remember that special education is a service, not a place. And so when designing and considering the least restrictive environment, we have to consider what it is that is restrictive about the general education classroom. Can modifications be made? Can accommodations be made? And so really going through kind of this mental checklist before removing a student from the general education setting. And so thinking about what is it that is restrictive, um, before we have students separated out into separate classrooms and separate buildings and separate programs. And so really tinkering with what that term restrictive might mean as we
Mhm.
determine where is the best place for this child to receive an education.
Right. The third safeguard is the individualized education program. And so this is essentially a plan written out for each child that has a disability that is developed, reviewed, and revised at least annually by a team, which includes the educator, you as the parent, the student, if it's appropriate, and others who have knowledge or expertise needed for the development of the special education program for the child. But one thing I want to highlight here, the most important word in this is individualized, based on the needs of that specific child.
And so really being mindful of that this is, uh, a legal document that outlines this child's education. And so being explicit, being clear, making sure that we have the IEP will outline goals for your child that they should be working towards. And again, these are goals that, all students, regardless of ability, we have goals for all of our students. It's just clearly outlining it and again this document, and so those goals will be in whatever areas your child needs support in. And we want to make sure with IEPs that it's not painting children in a deficit lens, that we're really capturing what is so amazing and wonderful about our children, and that we're really starting off with their strengths. And so taking a strengths-based approach to these documents, writing what the child is really good at, because that will help everybody, parents, caregivers, educators, know what to lean into to help them work towards those goals. And so with those goals, we should also have clear benchmarks written in, you know, by let's say January, Johari will, be able to complete 6 out of 10 addition problems with little to no intervention. By March, Johari will be able to do 8 out of 10. And so we want to make it explicit so we can track that progress clearly with data to show that the child is making progress and that they are achieving their goals.
Mhm. The next is the appropriate evaluation. And so IDEA requires that a student must receive an evaluation before providing special education services to determine whether the student actually qualifies as a child with disability according to the IDEA's definition. And if so, to then determine what the educational needs are of the child. One of the most important things here is that you as a parent must give permission for evaluation and for services. And the student must be evaluated in all the areas of the suspected disability.
So some things to be mindful of with appropriate evaluation. This is where language really comes into play. So being mindful of, is the child being tested in their home language? Are there any language barriers? We also want to be mindful of, if we have a student who is perhaps nonverbal, are the tests requiring verbal output, and is that an accurate measure of what they know? So really being mindful with any evaluation measures, what are the barriers in place that might prevent us from getting an accurate snapshot of what the child can do?
The fifth procedural safeguard is parent, teacher, and student participation in the decision-making process. So IDEA is very specific in regards to what schools must do to ensure that parents have the opportunity to be active participants in each step of the special education process. So parents and whenever, available or appropriate, students also should be meaningfully involved in crafting, in the development of the IEP, educational placement decisions, really throughout the whole process.
So again, really taking that student-centered approach, right? That this may be a document written about a child, but we should see evidence in this whole process of the child participating, right? To the extent appropriate. Um, the student and the child, they should be saying, here are my goals for myself. And then we are taking all of their goals and what they would like to do into consideration as we develop these services that we are providing them. Again, really emphasizing that it's a service that we're providing, that it supports that we're providing, and they're provided to the child to help them achieve their goals for themselves. And again, as parents and as families, you should certainly have a say in this process, and really being mindful that, again, we see back in our other video about understanding inclusion, that collaboration is a key tenet, and so it's collaboration with families as well. And so really making sure that the law outlines that you should be an active participant throughout the process. And so really taking, inviting your child's teachers and educators to, to help you in raising your child and helping them on their educational journey, and making sure that that there is cooperation and collaboration as much as possible.
Mhm. And the sixth procedural safeguard is procedural safeguards. IDEA includes very important procedural safeguards to ensure that the rights of children with disabilities and the parents are protected and that you all have access to the information that you need to effectively participate in the special education process.
And so this one really goes into some of the history of education prior to um, the IDEA, or the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, back in the 70s, when students with disabilities were just being expelled from schools without any due process. And so
Mhm.
really making sure that that there is due process, that you are given active notice of changes and things like that, which we'll discuss in a minute. But um, also just being mindful of that there are ways to mediate any conflicts that arise, and that is outlined within the IDEA.
And so here are five um, parental rights to quickly highlight. But please go to NJDOE's New Jersey Department of Education's Parental Rights in Special Education Handbook online, so you can check out more rights that you do have. First one is that prior written notice must be sent out to you before changes are made to the IEP. Your consent and participation is required. Well, consent is required, participation highly encouraged, is needed. It should happen. If there's barriers in place, notify the school so that those can be worked out in order to ensure that you are able to actively participate. You have the right to access educational records and you have the right to obtain an independent evaluation. So our 3 takeaways today are that there are 3 acts that fall under educational and civil rights laws that govern special education. There are 6 procedural safeguards that are in place as prescribed by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And parents have rights throughout the special education evaluation, the administration process. We are happy to have connected with you today, and stay tuned for future sessions. We thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Please stay connected with the Learning Resource Center. Here's a QR code, which will take you directly to our website. Here's the link to the Parent Rights in Special Education Handbook through New Jersey Department of Education. Connect with the LRC-South. Here's some of our social media accounts. And you can follow us on social media as well. Have a great day.